Good afternoon and welcome to 94.7 FM, my Gospel Giant family. I am so glad to be with you today, and I'm elated to have you here with me for another edition of Doctor to Doctor in the chat room. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Shaw, and I'm here with my honored guest panel, and you'll hear from them momentarily. I pray that you guys are well. I hope that you're staying safe, and I pray that you're still operating under those necessary precautions to stay healthy as we are still in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that is a great segue into saying get tested. If you haven't already, please do so. And if you are uncertain about where to go or who to call, you can just contact your local health department and they will be able to kind of move you in the right direction. Okay. On March 13th, and I don't present these in any particular order, in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her apartment in South Louisville, Kentucky, when plainclothes police officers arrived outside her door in the early hours and began shooting recklessly and killed Breonna. Breonna was 26 years old. July 2015, Sandra Bland, after an escalated encounter with the Texas State Trooper, was arrested and later suspiciously found hanging in a jail cell. Sandra Bland was 28 years old. Back in February in Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery was seen on video being viciously shot and killed while just simply jogging through his neighborhood. Ahmaud Arbery was 25 years old. George Floyd was seen recently, May 25th, pleading for his life, calling for his mother, as a white police officer held his knee on the neck of Floyd for nearly 9 minutes, ultimately resulting in his death. Then there's the case in Central Park where a white female falsely accuses a black male of trying to attack her and her dog. That's not even really scraping the surface of how many incidents have played out over the years. And it's not only tragic to me, it's hugely unsettling to have to watch them all play out. And in many cases, there's no justice or minimal justice. Data collected by the Washington Post said that Blacks represent 12% of the population. However, they account for 31.8% of those that are killed by the police. So that means that victims of lethal use of force by police are over twice their rate in the general population. I want to start with something that I heard Chris Cuomo say on CNN the other night. He was talking about an African-American friend of his who asked him the question, why doesn't America love me? And I asked that question, like, why am I not loved by America? Because I will tell you that the evidence is astounding that supports that whole concept and that whole idea. So why is it so? So we're going to talk about it, and in hopes of finding some answers or at least some next steps towards answers. And I'm honored to have all of you here with me. And I want to say up front, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here. I want to let the listening audience know who we have with us today. We have President Gloria Jean Sweetlove, who is the president of the Tennessee State Conference NAACP and chair of the Southeast Region NAACP Leadership Caucus. Attorney Van Turner, who is a licensed attorney in Tennessee and Mississippi, and he also serves as County Commissioner for District 12 in Shelby County. And he is, along with many other accomplishments, on the board of directors for the Memphis branch of the NAACP. Pastor Donald Johnson serves as the senior pastor for the historical Oak Grove Mississippi Baptist Church. And he represents as a Memphis Police Department clergy police and is the team chaplain for the Memphis Grizzlies. Dr. Judy Cummins. She is senior pastor of the historic New Covenant Christian Church in Nashville, and she is a trained community organizer who serves as chair of the Anti-Racism Pro-Reconciliation Commission for the Tennessee Region Christian Church. Mr. David Johnson, who is with the Thomas J. Watson Foundation, which is a fellowship program that awards college graduates a one-year grant for independent study and travel outside the United States. He was, in fact, selected one of 41 Thomas J. Watson Fellows throughout the United States, and he graduated from the University of the South, where he studied politics and minored in economics. And in the fall, he plans to get his master's in public policy at the University of Chicago. And finally, we have Dr. Sekou Franklin, who is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Middle Tennessee State University. And he is also an author. And I say thanks again to each and every one of you. So back to my question. Why? Why doesn't America as a whole embrace people of color? What's your take?
Let me jump in, Rhonda. Half of the time you can't hear me well, but I hope you can. I think they don't embrace us because unlike other groups, when you think about, I think they still think about white privilege, and therefore they feel like any person of color. Now you can remember, not only do they not embrace Black folks, they don't embrace Latinos.
Yeah.
And even though the Arabs don't like to think about it, they really don't embrace them. If you've got some color in your skin, they continue to think that you are less than. They continue to think brighter is better. They've done that for over 400 years. This was a way for them to make us feel less than, and they are still using that today.
Looks like she's on mute.
Let me say thank you for having us on and letting us be a part of this wonderful panel as well and discussion. I believe, coupled with what Sister Gloria said, that in reality, I think our potential is intimidating. When you look at the Bible and how Herod thought to kill Jesus, who was just a baby, what is it about an infant that is intimidating? Anything that Blacks get involved in, we dominate, be it political, be it athletics, be it in the religious circle. And so I believe in a very real and practical way that our potential is intimidating, just the threat or our presence and what we could do, what we could bring to the table. And they don't realize that they're missing out on so much, because our aim is never to hurt, it's always to help. But it's just a mere fact that, we will excel. And so I just believe that they are threatened by our potential, not what we do, just the potential of what we can do.
Yeah, this is go ahead, Dr. Franklin, go ahead.
Well, I like to weigh in, and I think I agree with everyone. I just want to provide a little bit of a historical context about why we are not liked, and just to emphasize that racism and white supremacy were enshrined in the Constitution. And over time, there were individuals like Frederick Douglass and others who took the Constitution and used it to the advantage of African Americans. But from the very beginning in the founding convention, there were several provisions, not just the Three-Fifths Compromise, but other provisions that basically enshrined and extended slavery in the Constitution. And even if one were to look at, say, for example, Thomas Jefferson, who was not at the Constitutional Convention, but he was a lead author, at least, of the Declaration of Independence. Although he himself personally had issues with so-called slavery, he had enslaved persons, as you well know. But his famous book, Notes on Virginia, basically promoted white supremacy and offered what many scholars call a scientific rationale for white supremacy, that linked not just one's belief about so-called Black inferiority, but he offered a scientific rationale. He purported to offer a scientific rationale, and that scientific rationale, white supremacy, extended itself into the 20th century and, of course, the 21st century. So why do they hate us? Because from the very beginning, white supremacy, institutional racism, and attempts to make Black inferior were enshrined in the founding documents of this country.
Mhm.
Yeah. So there was a study done by the Pew Research Center on race in America in 2019. And this study showed that the majority of Americans, in fact, 50%, 56% of Americans say that President Trump has made race relations in America worse. 15% say that he made progress towards improving race relations, and 13% says that he tried but failed, and 14% says that he hasn't addressed the issue at all. Most Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians believe that President Trump has made race relations worse. What do you think?
I'll begin. I fall within that same category as the people who believe that he has certainly made race relations worse. Going back to what Dr. Sekou Franklin said and giving us that historical context, you can go back even further than that to the time that whites came to this land and displaced our native Indians because they were different. Trump continues in that same line of thought of a supreme a supremacy, of one being over the other, dominating. You can, from his the comments that he has made throughout his presidency, even prior to, even while he was on the campaign trail, have done nothing to bring the races together, but has done everything to bring division. And he takes delight in doing that. He takes delight in making remarks that he knows are gaslighting, and then when people approach him on it, you know, he's always has something else ready to go. But certainly, you know, he's never even apologized for the white supremacy when they marched, the neo-Nazis, when they marched in Charlottesville. He's never apologized for the comment that he made at that time. Both sides have, you know, both good and bad people. You know, on the East Side, there's really good people on both sides. So he certainly is a very divisive person and takes great delight in it. So I believe that he's done everything within his power and using his platform to continue to bring that division.
I agree with Dr. Cummings. Just his statements, as she already alluded to, his statements, I want to say they're without thought, but in reality, they do have thought. It's just who he is. And while he may not be the origin of it, he certainly helps to improve the friction. He does nothing to reduce the friction. And so I'm in that group that believe he has done an awful job of helping to bridge the gap between races. I just think he's done a horrible job.
Similar to both the pastors, I would like to chime in. I saw something on social media today, and it said that Trump has tooted his own horn, and Trump has stated that he's done more for the Black community than Lincoln, President Lincoln. He's created opportunity zones. This is him talking. He's funded HBCUs, he's funded school choice, and he's you know, assisted with criminal justice reform. And he always taunts the fact that, you know, or he upholds the whole thought process that he has lessened the unemployment rate for African Americans in the country, and he always reverts back to these talking points. When, as Dr. Cummings has stated,
I think Attorney Turner has frozen on us.
We're going to need the attorney to stop the dial-up.
I can.
and a lot of the
There he is.
There he is. Go ahead. We lost you for.
Okay, and a lot of the folks who supported General Forrest and they were against the takedown stated that towards the end of his life, he apologized for owning and trading slaves, and he apologized for what he had done. He even, came out, they say, against the Ku Klux Klan, an organization that he led was the first Grand Wizard. And so, I think we have to be clear that you have to take people in the time in which we're in. And while we do look at the whole life, we have to look at also the fact, where were you when we needed you the most?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you when we needed you the most? And yeah, we know that there's a body of work you must look at, but where are you now, Trump, when we need you the most and he's not to be found? And so when the history writers look at his presidency, they're going to ask, where was he during the aftermath of the George Floyd murder? And as we see, it's his character, it's his is what he is what he will always be, and he's not to be found. He's no friend of the African American community. He's no friend of anyone of any race that believes in justice and equality and democracy in this country. He is certainly the wrong man for the job, and he has set back race relations in this country probably 40 or 50 years, and that's out of his own mouth. When they loot, we shoot, which is something that's from the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're facing, and we have to keep focused on November 3rd, 2020. November 3rd, 2020 is the date of our presidential election, and I want all your listeners and viewers to understand that that is an important date for us and for this country, because that is the date that we can potentially change what's in the White House if we don't like what we're seeing now.
Sure.
Yeah. So, why do you think some people, even people of color, then support him? What do you think it is that makes people think he's doing no wrong and everything that he's saying is on the up and up?
Yeah. Well, as I stated, I mean, he has the gift of gab. He'll tell you whatever you want to hear or whatever is comfortable for you to hear at the time. And unfortunately, we have people who are, in our community that are willing to believe it and to take the paycheck and be happy with it. As long as I'm okay, my family is fine. I don't care about what's going on to the rest of folks in the community, in the African-American community. So unfortunately, you have these people. They've been around since we've been here, right? 400 years since 2019. Malcolm X said it a certain way, and I don't know who your listeners are, but he said there were two types of people in this country, one in the house and one in the field, and he had another word for it.
Yeah.
And that's been around since 1619. It's around in 2019. So you got some folks who want to be in the house, and that's what they're going to do. Then you got everybody on this call who out in the field fighting for our rights and our freedoms. And so that's what we are.
Yeah.
I'm in the
That's
field.
what it is.
Mr. Johnson, did you want to add something?
Yes, ma'am. I think you brought up a good point about why do people of color, or why do other people of color maybe join in behind President Trump? And for that reason exactly, we can't automatically assume that people of color all have the same interests and agendas as we do. If you look at the video of the execution of George Floyd, there's an Asian man standing right in front of him while he's getting choked out. So obviously our agendas are not the same, at least for some individuals. Now, it's great to stand with individuals and groups that are indebted into your agendas and into your interests, but we can't automatically assume that just because someone has some sort of melanin, has some shade to their skin, that they automatically have our best interest in hand, and they would fight for us as much as we would fight for them. Black people have always jumped in the forefront for every other fight. For Asians, for Hispanics, for the LGBTQ community. We have always been on the front lines for them because we want them to help us. And when that's not done in return, then we're sad, then we're upset, and we're left just by ourselves. So we have to remember that POC is a myth. We have individuals, we have other groups that we know may share our same interests, may share our same desires, but we can't assume just because of the color of their skin that they have the same mindset and doctrine as us.
That's a very good point.
Could I weigh in on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just in terms of some data points, that in 2016, the most oppositional group to Trump in the American electorate was Black women, by far. I mean, if you look at all the data points of who voted against Trump the most, who sent out the warning signs, African-American women. And it's going to line up that way in this election too as well. I would probably be very mindful of, or be on to see how the Asian vote works, because people like Andrew Yang and also Trump's attacks on Chinese Americans, that could moderate some of the more conservative Asians who typically may vote for Republicans. But Trump's strategy for Black folks is to hope that Black folks become so disillusioned with the American political process that it's not about whether they vote for him or Biden, but it's that whether or not they vote for Biden or don't vote at all. And Trump is hoping that he could downsize the Black vote in such a way that the numbers don't approach a 2008, 2012 level, which in 2016 they did not. It was 5 or 6 percentage points lower than it was in 2012. So the strategy is actually really not to win over Black folks. The strategy more so is to convince Black folks that there's no difference between him and Biden. To sow mass disinformation, to sow disillusionment and nihilism with the black electorate, particularly younger Blacks, that they just don't vote at all. And so that's kind of his hope and his strategy, particularly in those key swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and those kinds of things. So if he can convince Black folks, even it could be just 5 or 10%, just 5%, that there's no difference between the two candidates, or all systems are screwed up, nothing works, there's mass disillusionment. My
vote doesn't count.
My vote doesn't count. That's what his real fundamental idea is, as opposed to him trying to win over 20 or 30% of African Americans or something like that.
Yeah,
Sure.
And that's why civil rights groups are important, in which they can identify the difference, in which they can also engage in a campaign to counter disinformation. And if I could just make this one last point, and I'm sorry for talking so long. There's a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, who produced a report that was submitted to the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. And that report documented the mass disinformation campaign that foreign sources enacted against Black folks in 2016. It's an official part of the U.S. Bipartisan Intelligence Committee report, approved. And if anyone wants any information about that, any of your viewers, I can send that to them. And it was specifically targeting African Americans with that message that there's no difference between the candidates. Thus, why should you vote at all?
So, like, what can people of other ethnicities, other groups do to become better allies for ending racism? We're going to talk about that, but we're going to go to break, and we will be right back on 94.7 FM. We are back on 94.7 FM, The Gospel Giant, and I am still here with this great panel of people, and we are talking about race relations in America. So when we left, we were talking about how other ethnic groups could become better allies for ending racism in America. Would you guys speak to that, please?
Well, let me jump right in real quick, Dr. Rhonda. I really don't know if we need them to be an ally, because again, this is just my personal thought, because in being an ally, you're saying you're coming to help us. I think other ethnic groups needs to see this as their problem as well, and not just, oh, I got to help out my my Black brothers or my Asian brothers. I think they need to see this as a problem themselves and make it their mission.
That's a great point.
To help, change the narrative and help turn it around, because if they don't ever see it as their problem, then they'll just keep throwing us, a few niceties, to appease us and, kind of keep us quiet. But I think my thought is that we don't need allies as much as we need them to be in the fight.
I have to agree with Dr. Johnson. I think they need to better understand that I always come back to the fact that I did some graduate work at UT Knoxville, and and you know, it was in statistics and business management. And I had a lot of Arab, you know, fellow students. And one of the issues, they would say, well, you don't act like other blacks. And I say, what do other blacks act like? And from discussing with them, they didn't really think they were black. And, you know, and I just had to tell one of them one day, the only difference they see in me and you, they know you got the oil money and I don't have it. But you know, I think they need to understand, and that's why I think, but I do think it's important that we work in coalition to get them to understand whatever, I always say, whatever issues you can agree on, let's agree on those. There might be some issues that you can't agree on, but let's agree on those things that we can, and let's collectively try to move forward. Because I think now, you know, a lot of times when we talk the whole, you know, I'm really in the education, we talk to education equity piece. Asians don't really see the real thing because they said, oh, wait, you know, we off the chart on SAT, ACT, etc. But you know, when you as an Asian doctor almost discounted, you know, by a national president, what you know, what kind of standard, what does that say to the rest of America? So I think they need to start to see, you know, you can't walk in my shoes, but to better understand what it's like. You know, I wish folks could understand what it's like being a black mama, you know, having raised 4 sons, and every time they leave home, you know, you're wondering if they're gonna make it back. You know, when Jay used to leave here going to cookbook, you know, we would tell him, you know, okay, you know, here's what you do. If you get stopped, keep your hands on the steering wheel. You wonder, you know, before cell phone was, you know, I'd be calling the dorm to see if my baby made it to Cookbook. So, you know, and now with my grandsons, it's the same thing. I did not think when I saw Dad and them standing in line to register to vote, that in 2020, I would still be worried about my grandsons not coming home.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just really unsettling. It's unsettling.
Can I add to that real quick? I agree, by the way. I think I'm maybe in a minority, but organizers, when they use the word allies, it doesn't exactly explain communities of struggle and some of the things that Pastor Johnson stated. I want to relate to that just real quick, that in the 1960s, SNCC and whites who came through SNCC developed a short-lived thing called the White People's Project, and then the SDS had a urban-based organizing program called ERAP, and in some of these initiatives, what whites did was to go into white working class communities and organize them around economic justice, pro-civil rights initiatives. And I think with this, and we have the same thing across the country. You had BLM emerge, but then the companion group was showing up for racial justice. But the difference back then versus now is, although we see a lot of whites pouring into the streets, I think some more targeted organizing would be more efficient if we had the same amount of whites that would put together, you know, multi-tier organizing campaigns in rural white communities in places like Tennessee. So what happens is that we have a lot of whites pouring into downtown centers for downtown protests, state capitals, but the level, the kind of anti-racist organizing among whites in working class white communities that are voting for these lawmakers, we don't see that. And I think as we move forward in these communities of struggle, we have to figure out a way in which we can convince, you know, whites and others that you can do the same thing as what occurred in the 60s in terms of organizing your communities around these particular agendas that are in concert with what African Americans do.
Mm-hmm. You know, thank you. And I appreciate Pastor Johnson, his comments also. You know, I agree with you, Dr. Sekou. We just don't see, we see very few white people leading bold and courageous conversations and engaging in any kind of direct social activism or even participating in civil disobedience in a way that brings and disrupts this racist systems and structures. One of the things, I preached on Sunday, and I probably should not have, because the anger was just right there. It was Pentecost Sunday, right? So the spirit was right there. I posted my sermon on Facebook, and I said to our white allies, white people, do not ask me again what you can do. You know what to do. You know what to do. And so to the end of, Franklin was talking about what happened in the 60s. I sent a text out today. I said, listen, you can use your white voice, use your white skin, call your own press conference, call your own march together. Have these discussions in your own white caucuses, do your own damn work. It shouldn't be on the backs of Black people to do your work for you. You know what to do. You've been complicit, in this system called racism. So now you can help dismantle this system. 2 books that I always tell white folk to read. You need to read White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. She puts it on the line. She goes back to that historical piece, and she shows them how they have participated and benefited. And the other book, White Fragility. I just think that we just don't have enough bold and courageous folks. They'll get out there and march with you, because that's sexy and that's exciting. But when it comes to do the hard work, to use their voice, to use their privilege, to dismantle these systems and these structures, they just don't rise up to the challenge. And so, yeah, their world, they need their whole worldview to be shaken.
Yeah, so recently with the incident with George Floyd, there have been some more bold statements being made from some that I've seen in social media. What's different now? What do you think about that changed the scope for some people that are not of color?
I would have to say, and I do so appreciate the Catholic Church, the United Church of Christ, and all of those institutions that have come out with very bold statements against racism. I think what the difference was this time with this particular death, as it was for me, and my heart is just still so heavy and just so feel, my eyes just continue to fill with tears. I think what was different this, even though we're seeing the deaths of other African Americans on video, this video was clear.
Yeah.
Quality of this video, there was no gray areas. And when I don't care, you can be that animal rights activist, that tree hugger, that climate change person. When you see the very life of another human being being suffocated right before your very eyes, and you hear this human being calling for their mama, I think that helped to break and for people, to see. But, unfortunately, like with so many of our deaths that have happened in the African American community, that memory is short-lived and it begins to fade away, and it's going to be that memory alive. But yeah, I think that was one of the seeing it right before your very eyes.
Yeah, attorney.
I think similar to when the country saw the Emmett Till open casket, and they saw how this 14-year-old young man was basically tortured and killed. It really sparked something in this country, and it touched the conscience of this country, and you really saw the coming together of a lot of forces, which led to the 65 Voting Rights Act, the 64 Civil Rights Act, and to a lot of change within the country. And so similar to the Emmett Till open casket, and as the minister so eloquently stated, we are having this experience all over again. This is within the psyche of not only this nation, but the world. That video is, Paris is on fire. All Iran is on fire. And so all these other countries are seeing, here you are, America, the bastion of civility and democracy. You come and you look down on us and our countries and tell us what's right, and look what you have in your own backyard. And so therefore, I think you're seeing the outcry. And the question is, what's next? And I like where we're getting at. What are you going to do? And I like what's been said. When are you going to call your own press conference? When are you going to knock down all the discriminatory laws and things which are nuanced? Because racism is not in your face. You don't see a colored water fountain and a white water fountain.
Yeah.
But you do see our kids being placed in detention. You see our kids being placed in the classes for the quote unquote kids who have trouble learning.
Yeah.
And so you stigmatize our young men. You see all these little nuanced things which still discriminate against us and prevent us from, starting out where you start. All we want is the chance, right? We know what our culture can do. 12% of the population and our culture, I think, we have really dictated and driven American culture. American culture really emanates from Black culture.
Yeah.
Whether it's the jazz, whether it's our hip hop, whether it's the way Michael Jordan dunks the basketball, you name it, and we have been dominant. And I think that was touched on with your first question. And so, you love us so much, you love our culture so much, love us as human beings, and not just how we thrill you, you fantasize about what we can do. Just don't love that, but love us as human beings. Because all of us can't dunk like Mike. All of us can't sing like the singers and play the jazz like the other folks have played the jazz. Most of us are just regular human beings, and we want to be we want to be treated as regular human beings, similar to you. We want what your family want, and hopefully what we've seen with this murder of George Floyd will start to really bring about true change.
If I could expand on just something that at the height of the BLM, at the protest that Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, then it wasn't just African Americans out there. If you really look at it, it was, but by 2015, 2016, Dr. Cummings, you notice there were also whites out there. Quite a lot of them around the cities, organized through Showing Up for Racial Justice, organized through DSA chapters, Democratic Social chapters. But what we need to see, and right now you see city after city the same thing. But what I'm talking about is, let's take as an example in Tennessee. In Tennessee, our House Judiciary Committee is controlled by, there are many people on it, but the two most influential voices are white men in their 30s, one from Dixon, one from Robertson County, both of whom represent overwhelmingly majority white working class communities, in which there are major problems there. There's major problems there, although white working class folks. What we need to see the white protesters do is, can they organize a student nonviolent coordinating committee like Project in Dixon, in Lake County, in Robertson County? Mm-hmm. Can they sustain demonstrations in those particular counties where these lawmakers are from and are largely insulated?
Yeah.
And that's what the movement in the 60s, by 65, 66, by the early, that's what they were trying to figure out. We knew that young whites could go into Mississippi Delta and others and organize with blacks. We know now, at least since 2015, 2014, that young whites can go downtown and protest. What we don't know, what's not in place, is how can we penetrate these largely, overwhelmingly supermajority white communities in which they have an overwhelming stranglehold on the politics of every single Southern state, with the exception of 2 or 3, and that's the test that we got to see. Does that make any sense at all to folks? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've seen on social media that they're asking African American people to not shop, I want to say on July 7th. What is not shopping for a day? I mean, is that going to do to combat racism? And I ask that question not because I'm against it. I just want to know, what is it going to do to remedy this issue? Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
I think it's a great step in the right direction, but it only gives a taste of what can possibly happen. First of all, you don't announce it everywhere where everybody can see, where the people who own these corporations, the people who own these platforms can see. That's not how these type of projects and protests work. You do that in discretion. You do that in your own communities, whether that's the church, whether that's in your own community organization building. You don't announce that to where these people who own all the money, who own all the platforms, operate, so that they can navigate their systems so that they won't miss a step.
Yeah.
And secondly, we live in a different time, and we really need to buy into discipline if we're going to do something as serious as that. Because obviously the Black business during the 60s and the 50s was more necessary because of segregation. So we had to use those. So they attracted more business. And even when we were pushing for integration, we were able to use those businesses to try to push for the government to change those laws. Now we're in a different time. So we really have to see we already have the Black businesses enough in each industry. We just need to really sit down, organize in discrete areas, and be disciplined about something like this, because it definitely can affect them. We spend a lot of money, we attract a lot of attention. We just have to be smart and feasible about how we do something like this.
Pastor Johnson.
Yep, I agree with Mr. Johnson. Of course, all Johnsons are good people anyway, but I believe it's a step in the right direction. I think it shows those capitalists that there is power in capital. And if we can get our people to buy into it with some kind of consistency and develop the discipline where, okay, I'm not going to buy this. I'm not going to, because I think our people have to look at the big picture and not just the snapshot. Because we'll get caught up on, well, Dillard's is having a sale or Nike is having a sale and I got to go. But if we look at the big picture and how this will affect us long term, I think it's a great, great, great start. I think maybe T.I. is the first person I heard say something about blackout or no spending on the 7th or something of that nature. I'm not sure who it was, but I think we're moving in the right direction. We're moving the needle with this behavior, but I don't think it's just one thing that's going to help change the narrative. I think it's going to be a collection of things. I think our white brothers and sisters, or whatever you want to call them, I think they need to learn some racial behaviors, because some of the things they do, they don't think it's racial. It's so natural and so normal to them.
That is such a good point. Yeah.
They just do it without thought. And so they need to sit down and hear and learn the policies and change the policies. And we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But I think what Mr. Johnson said, that's a move in the right direction to at least, our money counts. We have great, great power with our money. We just got to we see that. But how do we get JoJo to see that and little Ray to see that and Shaniqua? How do we get them to see and to buy in to the long-term project?
That's a really good point, because I saw, I have a Facebook friend that reposted a post of a friend of his, and he's white, and he was asking his white Facebook friends to comment and give him an opinion of whether they thought that post was racist or not. And the post said something like, has anybody found out if there are any welfare departments that are burning yet, that have been burned down? Right? So this was a pastor in Dyersburg, Tennessee, that actually posted that. And if there were 100 comments, 50 of them were like, it's kind of, but not blatant, or that's how they saw it. So you're very right. Their perception of what racism is totally jaded sometimes. So yeah, that's a great point. Were you gonna chime in?
But also, Dr. Rhonda, I think perception of even well-to-do Blacks is jaded. We still get people that call or come into the office and say, I think I've been discriminated against, but I'm not sure. And they 40-year-old Blacks. So, sometimes, we don't quite get it. Sometimes, we've been so blessed, and so privileged that we don't see racism the way it is. And, and what I always tell my sons, it really does not matter that you can be VP of this or that or head of that department. The bottom line is the white boys think they got a black boss. Now that's very real. So many of, and so what we get concerned about, and what our president said the other night, Attorney Derrick Johnson, and I applaud, is that what we need to be asking folks to do when they ask, what should I do? You need to contact all the folks make sure that they sign up for the census. You need to make sure that seniors and folks that are sick, that they get a mail-in ballot. You need to make sure that not just that everybody not just you, but 5 or 10 more folks, your siblings and your associates are registered to vote. And then you all need to go vote in November. So, there are some things, and you need to give to those organizations that are doing the work. Some folks are not going to do the work. If you're not going to do the work, you need to be willing to contribute to those folks. Everybody shows up at our door when something goes wrong. But where are you, when we are needing somebody to just be an advisor to the youth council? Where are you when we need simple kinds of things done? You all were talking about a blackout day. NAACP used to do that all the time. As a matter of fact, we would do it like in September. We do blackout days where we would not spend any money. All the money you spent was in the Black neighborhood. Why is it that we spend all our money somewhere else? If Van is an attorney, hey, if I got a problem, I need to take my money to Van. So, but we don't see that. So that's what we got to tell folks. And that's what David, that's what we got to get our folks to see. We got to get them to see. It's we want to turn it over to you, but please understand, it's not just the way you see it. There are a lot of other scenarios.
I know that you are going to have to step out in a moment. So do you have any final thoughts about how we should move forward, President Sweetlove? You're on mute. You're on mute. There you go.
Sorry about that. I'm unmuted. Thank you for pulling this together. Thanks to all the panelists for being present. But what we need to tell the world is that is much work to do, but we need workers in the vineyard. Van is president of the Memphis branch. He needs workers everywhere. And Memphis needs to be twice as big as it used to be. And Memphis used to be the biggest unit in the nation. And it needs to be twice that big. So when I look at folks that are trying to crowd on the bridge, I'm saying go work with Van. And I think we need to be saying that. We need to be saying that, we've got to get it. We've got a COB in Nashville because we fought for it and we had to fight hard for it. The NAACP was right there in the middle of that. We need to be in the middle of every other one wherever it's needed. We need workers in the vineyard. And I mean, we said it simple, do the census, do the early voting, get folks registered to vote, go to the polls and take somebody with you. Bless you all. Have a great time. Let me go get on with President Johnson.
Thank you so much for being here. So guys, do you think racism will ever become uncommon or even a thing of the past? Let's talk about that when we come back from break on 94.7 FM. We're back on 94.7 FM, The Gospel Giant, and I'm still here with my panel talking about race relations in America. Guys, tell me, do you think racism will ever become that thing that's frowned upon and uncommon and a thing of the past? What do you think?
I'll
Everybody
jump in. I'll
out.
jump in
Go
first.
ahead.
It could, but and when I say it could, that's in a like a hypothetical situation, in a dream situation. It could, but likely will not, because if racism ended, that would mean that a lot of these people would have to give up their privilege, and I don't see that happening anytime soon, unless we use this momentum that we have right now, when the world is watching us, to really put our boots to the ground and put attention and pressure on the U.S. government and saying, hey, we didn't just tear down the city because George Floyd died. This is 400 years of pent-up aggression and pain that you've put us through that will only get worse and worse and worse if you don't address our concerns. So we have to use this momentum, and the only way that I guess racism could change or could go away is if we use this momentum. But that would also have to rely on people giving up their privilege.
Yeah.
Coupled with that, certainly, I agree with Mr. Johnson. But I also think we'll always have it because we just have flawed people. But I don't think it's going to be a policy or it's going to be anything that one person does. I think until we can get the hearts, and I'm not trying to be super spiritual here though, but until we can get the hearts of people to change, and then their minds will change, and then their manners will change, and then the motive will change. But as long as we have people who don't have the heart of Christ, and that doesn't mean they have to become, filled with the Holy Spirit and baptized with the fire and all of that. But you got to have a conscience.
Yeah.
You got to have a love for people. My grandmother, who's upstairs with the Lord now, she said in her day, we used to love people and use things. Well, now we love things and use people. And until we go back to the place where we start loving people, I think we'll have racism on many different levels. I think it'll still be prevalent. I don't think that keeps us from still pushing toward change, as Brother David says. But until we get the hearts and the mindset of people to really change, not just change the narrative and change the laws, but until their hearts change. If you notice a stop sign doesn't make us stop. It just suggests to us stop. And so to put laws in place, you still got to have people that will comply, and they do that with a change of heart. That's my view concerning that.
Yeah, I want to just jump right on to what Pastor is saying. Racism, it's not a Black issue, right? It's a humanity issue. And as he said, it's going to take the power of God to change people's hearts and minds. You cannot legislate love. You cannot legislate respect. That comes from a transformed heart.
Yeah.
Racism is America's greatest sin. It is a sin. It is a sin against God. And we have to begin to look at it like that. Since creation, humanity has always had a desire to dominate. When God created, he told them to do what? Go and have dominion over all my creation. But then somehow it got turned and they wanted to have dominion over other people. So I believe that racism is always going to be around because racism is a sin. It's a sin against God. It denounces the very source of humanity. The source of humanity, God says that all humankind is made in my image and in my likeness. Racism denounces that. And so if you can denounce that, then that means that thing is evil. It is evil, blatantly evil, and totally incompatible with the gospel, with the good. And so I think that it's going to always be with us, institutional, on a personal level, because there's just this strong need to dominate.
Yeah. Dr. Frank.
I'll just bring in a little bit of the research and agrees with it. Racism is, and its vestiges more than likely will be here. But there's some nuances. Joe Freegan had a study, and I think he identified that just middle-class African Americans experience in this data set about at least 200 individual cases of racism per year. at least. And if you maximize that over the course of a lifetime, that then impacts trauma, mental health, depression.
No doubt.
Racism, no, will not end, but there are ways in which you can regulate it, in which you could potentially moderate it. And I want to emphasize that if you do look at racial attitudes from, today versus say but by the 1940s, the majority of Americans did not want African Americans to serve in integrated military units. That was emphatic. 40 years earlier, many white Americans thought that African Americans were scientifically and biologically inferior. So we've seen an evolution and an improvement of racial attitudes, in part because of movements on the ground. But at the same time, given those improvements, you still see huge divisions on a range of issues between whites and blacks, and the continuance of racism, racism. The one caveat I will say is the one dynamic that we've seen in the last, I would say, 5 years, exacerbated by the racial animus against Obama, and also exacerbated by Trump. And this is based upon a report, I believe, by Bartlett, who looked at a series of readings from people who wrote about race. And this is what he found out that's unique, is that many whites today feel that not only are many whites, do they operate with the belief that racism doesn't exist, but many whites feel that they themselves now are the victims of racism.
Mm-hmm.
And that argument has become more intransigent as part of this anti-Obama racial animus wave and pro-Trump wave. And that's a unique issue, that if you ask the Bull Connor segregationists, they may say we hate blacks, but they may not necessarily say that we are the victims of racism. Whereas today, many whites feel that they are the new N-word based upon the series of data sets that have been looked at. And that's a unique phenomenon when you have many whites feeling that they themselves are treated more unfairly and systematically than our African Americans. Yeah. And that presents a unique challenge for organizing.
Yeah. Attorney?
Yeah, if I could chime in, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing had a book called The ISIS Papers. And when I was an undergraduate, we read that book, and it basically talked about genetically how the gene of people of color is dominant in some respects, and over the course of time, you will see the browning of America. I think that was a popular phrase maybe 5 years ago, and they're saying by year 2050, America will no longer be a majority white country. And hence you have all of these, consequences, which we're perhaps seeing now because that's just 30 years on down the road. And, maintaining control of resources, having that privilege, and all of these things are attuned to whiteness in order to suppress the numbers which are growing on the other end when you take the Latino population growing in our population. And when you look across the world, we're not the minority. People of color, Africans, people of who are melanated are the majority. Right. And so, to me, you kind of see some of the things that we're seeing now, because you got to have some way to maintain superiority, control of resources, and privilege. And it's the color of the skin. But that's why I like what the pastor said. Some of this is spiritual too. If not, then explain the Hutus and the Tutsis how black folks can go chop up other black folks because of something that white folks have told them. Mm-hmm. And we saw that in plain sight, the Rwandan genocide. And so if not race, would it be tribes? And we know that there's tribal warfare in old Europe, and sometimes you look at, present day Africa and what has happened in Africa. And so, and that's why I think the pastors are good. There's a need to dominate and to feel you are superior to the next person, and a need for the privilege and to control the resources. And so that has to be torn out from us. That has to be torn out, and we can only rely on spirituality in order to do that. Because if it's not what we're doing now, as far as looking at race, then it could be some other reason that we're looking towards to separate us and to dominate other folks. So, I just wanted to add that in. If we look at what happened in Rwanda, that wasn't racism as we know it, black and white. That was tribal strife and tribal war. So, turning to God and turning to spirituality ultimately is going to be the key for all of this, I think.
Yeah, there has to be. I mean, if the world in which we live has always been privileged for white people, and for them to even consider losing control, losing those privileges or whatever, I'm sure it is. I'm sure, as we say, they feel some type of way. Um,
But whiteness is the norm, right? It is the absolute norm. It is the standard, has
Mhm.
become the standard by which everything else is measured.
Mhm.
So who would want to lose that?
Absolutely.
Doc, in our churches, and I'm sure Pastor Cummings can attest to this, when you have people that have held positions in churches forever, I think when the Lord said, "Till death do us part," they thought he was talking about positions. And when you have some freshness that comes in, and they are what Jim Cymbala called fresh wind, fresh fire. Now those people who held those positions, they start fighting because they are suffering from the death of the church they used to know.
Yeah.
And so you have white people who have held these positions forever, and now they see that we really do read as good or better, and we really can run faster, and we really can jump higher, and we really can articulate ourselves. So now again we go back to that threat where they see that their power is starting to seep away, and it goes back to Dr. Franklin's statistics, where they're now starting to feel like they are, the minority, or they are being, racism has been shown toward them. The truth of the matter is they're suffering from the death of the position that they used to have. And once we as Blacks realize that our presence, listen, I'm through when I tell you this. In Mark chapter 5, there's a man that is a lunatic. And the Bible says in verse 15 and 16 of Mark chapter 5, and when Jesus came, they found the one who had been demon possessed and who had the legions. They found him sitting clothed, and here's the kicker, and in his right mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as long as he was a fool, nobody was afraid of him. As long as he was in the tomb crying and cutting himself with stones, he was not a threat.
Yeah.
But what is it about a man that is sitting clothed and in his right mind? The Bible said, and then they were afraid. Because as long as we, keep calling everybody my nigga, cuz, dude, man, nobody's afraid. As long as we got tattoos on our neck, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus,
Yeah.
as long as we call our women a name that rhymes with itch and begins with B, nobody's afraid. But when we are sitting clothed and we talk like, Attorney Jones, or talk like Dr. Franklin, then that becomes intimidating, because an educated Black man is a threat to society.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to do an offering. I'm just letting y'all know.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing that Attorney Van pointed out, which I think for your audience, it's so critically important. You guys hear me yet? In 1980, the non-white electorate voting age population was about 11%. In 2008, that non-white voting population, the electorate, was 25% to 27%. By 2012, that number was 27 to 29%, and is growing. If Obama runs in 1980, he probably loses, because the non-white electorate is smaller, if that makes any sense. And so this way, using racism and race as a wedge, particularly with Trump,
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. The feeling that they're losing power, that's part of it. Gerrymandering districts, which is going to be a redistricting fight, between 2021 and 2022. That's part of it. That there's a non-white electorate that's growing and that is influential. And we have to also, I just want to make sure I acknowledge that part, because that did come up, and how critically important it is, because those people on the other side who are using racial animus and racism as wedge issues and are depending upon it. That's some of the data that they're looking at.
Yeah. So I hope you guys can stick around for a few more minutes because I do have just a few more questions that I really want us to touch on before you leave. One is, do you believe America can survive 4 more years of the Trump administration? And in light of COVID-19, is that going to be have a negative impact on voting? I will leave that there on the table for a minute and then I'll move on in a second for those of you that can stick around.
I,
Have to,
I think we can survive Trump. It's going to be hell, but I think we can survive, especially we as a race of African Americans. Survival is a part of our makeup. It's a part of our DNA. Our forefathers, and even further back than that. And I'm sure Dr. Franklin has a statistical presentation of that. But, our grandmothers, I mean, they knew how to make it with nothing in the refrigerator. They knew how to take some, tomatoes and okra and create whatever they knew how to create. So we know how to survive. But is it going to be painful? Absolutely it is, because Trump is the most ill-prepared and uncouth and unholy and unwholesome and unethical and everything president that I've seen in modern history. But I still believe that we're God's people, and I still believe that nothing happens. I believe God allows some things to happen, but I still believe that God is in complete control. And for the people of God, I believe that God's going to take care of us. But will America survive? Yes. But we'll have whoever comes in behind him it's going to take them, they'll have to have 4 years, 2 terms, to just get close to undoing some of the foolishness that he has and perhaps will put in place. But to answer your question, I think we will survive, but it will certainly be very challenging.
Yeah.
And I agree, and I am going to have to go to another meeting.
Yeah.
It will be hard, but we are a resilient people, so we will survive. One of the things that I want to say before I leave, particularly as it relates to how do we continue to move forward, it's going to take our vote. We have got to get on the same page. We've got to begin to elect people who look like us, who have our interests at heart. We've got to get serious about this. Mm-hmm. And our millennials are, and I'm sure Dr. Franklin has a statistic about this, but our millennials, they make up 40% now of that vote. We've got to get them to the polls. Something has to excite them.
Yeah.
This is, our vote is one tool that we have access to. Audre Lorde says that you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. We've got to use this tool called voting so that we can get some bold, courageous leadership on both the local and the national level who have our best interests at heart. So I'm hoping absentee ballot that certainly we're going to have to put in place, that there are measures, security measures put around it, so that there's never one person who is handling the ballots, that there's no less than 5 people who are handling those ballots at any one time. But we have got to get people to the polls. Our vote is crucial.
Dr. Cummins, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you
so much, and it was so good to be with the panel. Thank you for the work that you're continuing to do and for getting this word out. God bless you all.
God bless you. Dr. Franklin?
I was just giving a thumbs up.
Gotcha. Attorney, were you?
I would.
Were you asking for me?
Yeah, were you chiming in?
Yeah, like everyone else has stated, I think we can survive, and surviving is not thriving. So how do we look after, these 4 years with Trump? I think we look terrible, as the pastor has stated. he has been everything that we would not want in a president and a leader. And so having to endure potentially 4 more years of this would almost be madness. But we can survive, as was stated. If we survived the Middle Passage, we survived the brutality of slavery, we survived the cotton fields, survived Reconstruction. If we survive the civil rights movement, surely we can survive a madman in the White House.
Yeah.
And for most of that history, the man in the White House has been against us. If we really look at our history, we've had Lincoln, we've had John F. Kennedy, and we've had Lyndon B. Johnson. And of course, in recent times, we've had more progressive presidents. But most of the presidents throughout the entire history of this country have been against what we've fought for, and we've survived. So this is nothing new to us as a people. We will survive, but we are entitled to thrive. There's probably some scripture to it, and the pastors can quote it better than I can. But we're not put here just to survive. We're put here to thrive and to live out, the true meaning of what it is to be a human being, and to actualize that, and to live that, and to live the fullness of what our Savior meant for us to have here in this nation, in this country. And it's not just to survive and to barely be making it, but it is to thrive and extol his virtues and values and be good Christians and good citizens of this country. And so I want to thrive, and the way that we can thrive is to vote on November 3rd, 2020. Our end where I began. Our Omega was an Alpha, and that was we need to get out and vote on November 3rd, 2020, and we need to make sure that we focus our pain, focus our disappointment, focus our anger, and instead of throwing a tire through a window, let's go and just punch that ballot box and put the right candidate in office. So when we wake up on November 4, 2020, we'll all be singing hallelujah from wherever we are. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. We got to protect the vote, make sure that our people are getting registered, make sure that they're using absentee ballots when feasible. And there are no excuses. I don't want to hear it. I hope that your listeners understand when we say there is no excuse that you have to not vote on November 3rd, 2020. Don't blame us. Don't blame the leaders. Don't blame the church. Don't blame the people who are out in politics, because that's on you. You know what you got in office, and you know what it's going to take to get him out of office. And we just got to do it on November 3rd, 2020.
So I want to ask each of you, and I saw you guys, I saw your hands. I want to ask each of you to talk about what you see as next, and I want you to just give your final thoughts as we come to a close today.
Well, you want me to start first? Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I'll piggyback on the last one. As last comment is my final thoughts. That there is a mail-in voting or universal vote by mail federal court case that the NAACP, state NAACP, along with other organizations are part of, and that case is in the U.S. was one of the federal courts in Tennessee, and that case will it's in one of the courts in Tennessee. I'm not sure which one. That case will probably be decided this week, if not next week, which will potentially expand vote by mail. And there are other court cases that are being litigated in places like Louisiana, I believe, Alabama, and other places like that. So this is a big deal, particularly in the COVID-19 pandemic era. And what's next? I think for one of the things in working with grassroots activists and young people that I was surprised about, and I think it's a challenge to myself and to me, is I was talking about it with someone today, is finding a better way to do it, getting better at explaining why the election is important. What are the consequences of this? And so Trump is going to have access to 180. Trump appointed 180 federal judges who have lifetime appointments. they're going to be litigating whether or not people's family members get locked up. Okay, they're going to be litigating environmental justice issues, explaining that to folks. The voting rights section of the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, it's been for the most part null and void. It's invalid. They don't. I mean, it's non-operational under the Trump administration. The consent decrees that Obama signed with Ferguson, Baltimore, the consent decree in Ferguson went after the debtor's prison. That is, fines, fees, and obligations that are being imposed upon working class Black folks. Those have been eliminated by Donald Trump. The National Labor Relations Board has been eviscerated in terms of pro-union policies. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. And these are issues that affect everyday working class Black folks. So I think for me, I'm going to try to find better ways to explain why that matters to everyday people and why the vote matters in November to hopefully kind of try to mobilize consciousness activity around that.
Yeah, that's very important. Mr. Johnson, you were going to say something.
Yeah, and I guess on that note, I think our community, whether we, which I know we will, survive this election if we get 4 more years of Trump, or if we get a Democrat, we'll be fine and we'll make a way. But we need to use this momentum and energy that we have, the national spotlight that we have, in my personal opinion, to bring focus to reparations. And reparations to me is not just a check. It's gonna go to every Black person who descended from, slaves, the enslaved in America. But it starts a national conversation about what is owed to African Americans and the debt that America owes to us. Mm-hmm. And this has been argued from like the 1700s, 1800s, Belinda Royal, Callie House from Tennessee, Cobra. So many different organizations have gone to this one point of reparations. Reparations can change the narrative of how we teach. It can change the way that we police. It can change our healthcare system. It can change so many things larger than just thinking of a check that's paid out to individuals. It'll change the national conversation, and we need to use the spotlight like other countries have done. I've lived in Rwanda, I've lived in South Africa, I've lived in Germany, Northern Ireland, and they were really able to capitalize this international attention to get people to see what they are owed. And what they are owed is that restitution, is that justice, and that repair. So Black people, this is our moment, this is our time. We can really do this if we use this momentum and channel it into something tangible and to something specific and definite.
Yeah.
Dr. Shaw, I agree with Brother Franklin and Brother Johnson, certainly as well as Attorney Van. I think one of the things that helps us is when you have quality, competent people on panels like this, not only discussing it, on a Zoom, but they're out there in the field making it happen. To hear these brothers talk about, these are the things that I'm trying to do. These are the things that I'm trying to make happen. These are the people that I'm talking to. I think that's one of the things that will help catapult us to that next place. I think what's next, I agree with everyone. We got to get to the polls. We got to fill out the census. We got to get to the polls. I struggle, and I'm not dehumanizing or demonizing any of the people that's looting and rioting, but I struggle with you throwing a brick through a window but won't cast a vote. So I struggle with that whole mindset. And so we got to get the millennials, that 40% that's, now that population, how do we get them to see the importance of it? And then with me as a pastor, I realized that I got the mic. Yeah. And so my platform, these are my closing statements, but I have the mic. That's why I struggle, and I'm not attacking anybody, but I'm looking at my white brothers and sisters that run over to Bellevue and the Life Church and Germantown Baptist and all of that. But how do you sit there when your pastor doesn't speak to the pain that affects your people? Dr. King said that freedom is never, ever voluntarily given by the oppressors. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And so I think we as pastors, once we get through ain't he all right, won't he make a way, we still have to speak truth to power. And I think I criticize my white brothers and sisters that, Bellevue has 20,000 real people, not fluff numbers, but can you fathom what that would say to hear Steve Gaines talk about, not just refer, but to
Yeah.
actually do? He's doing a series right now on abortion, because they talk about that. They talk about homosexuality, and they talk about fornication and adultery, but racism, they'll refer to it in a, a part of their sermon and keep it moving. And I think when we stand and there are hundreds of people listening to us, we have to use that to our advantage and speak truth to power. And I think, and I challenge my pastors, I do it on the pastor's level. Franklin in his area, and Van, who's my friend and brother in his area, Brother Johnson, and the rest of them, even for you, Doc, I think what you are doing, where's Oprah? Hell, this is, where are those people? Because you're not afraid to address the real issues. And these are the conversations that we have to have. We really do. And so I celebrate you for putting the mic in your hand and bringing to the table quality. And I'm not celebrating myself, but I'm certainly not degrading myself, but to bring quality, competent people that can talk and can be some movers and shakers and make it happen. So I say kudos to you and my other brothers and sisters on this panel.
Thank you. Attorney, you have some final
As a
thoughts?
final word, yeah, I really appreciate this. This is refreshing. I mean, you see so much bad news. I mean, you watch CNN, you want to punch it through the screen. And it just hurts. We went from COVID-19 to Ahmaud Arbery to George Floyd. It ain't a wonder why we all ain't crazy in these.
Breonna Taylor.
All of us need to be on somebody's couch.
Yeah.
Trying to figure this thing out, because it's been rough. These have been it's been a rough 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And so but this is refreshing. It's good to vibe with this energy. Back in the day, we used to call it a cipher, and that's when the everyone would get in a circle and they'll just go back and forth and they'll build each other up. Mm-hmm. And you would try to outdo one another, but in doing so, you're building the whole group up, and you're coming up with all this creativity, and that's real black magic, as they say.
Yeah.
Like we talk about our ladies. And so, I appreciate this, and I'm energized to keep to keep going forward. There's that gospel song that says, "I feel like going on."
Yes.
And this makes us all feel like going on. So I appreciate this, Dr. Shaw. Very quickly, as I wrap up, the NAACP Memphis branch, we're pushing protest, policy, and protect. The protests are necessary, peaceful protests, but where do we go from there? We got to go to policy, and we got to make sure that we're pushing for a policy that makes it a situation where George Floyd never happens again, and that has to be ingrained in policy. And then we go to protect. We got to protect our vote. We got to protect those individuals who are protecting us and our communities by making sure that we elect the right folks to office, and in protecting our legislation and in protecting the right people and making sure that they're getting back into office. We protect our community and we protect the strides that we've made. So that's what we're pushing here as a local branch: protest, policy, and protect. And it's been a pleasure being on this panel with all of my colleagues and comrades in the struggle. I'm refreshed, I'm renewed, and Pastor, I'm ready to fight some more.
Let's go get it, man.
Right. I'm honored to have had all of you here today, and to the listening audience, we do not want George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the Sandra Blands. We don't want these incidents to fade into the distance. We want to use these to move forward. All right. We want to use these unfortunate incidents to move forward and to become a better America. I am so glad you were here. Come back and see us again next Saturday, same time at 2 p.m. on 94.7 FM, The Gospel Giant. We'll see you then.